The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 years. Maya rolled over in her tiny apartment, her body aching from another long shift at Romano's Italian restaurant. The small studio apartment wasn't much to look at: a fold-out couch that doubled as her bed, a mini fridge that barely kept her leftovers cold, and windows that looked out onto the busy street below. But there was one thing in that apartment that made it special. In the corner, covered with a faded floral sheet, sat her grandmother's old upright piano. The wood was scratched and worn, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them. But to Maya, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She had been living paycheck to paycheck for what felt like forever. After her grandmother passed away 2 years ago, Maya had to move to the city to find work. She brought nothing with her except a suitcase full of clothes and that old piano. The movers had cost her almost everything she had saved, but she couldn't bear to leave it behind. Every morning before work, Maya would sit at the piano for just 15 minutes. Her fingers would find the keys, and for those precious moments, she wasn't a struggling waitress anymore. She was 8 years old again, sitting next to her grandmother on the piano bench, learning to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for the first time. Her grandmother, Nana Rose, had been a piano teacher for over 40 years. She had taught Maya everything she knew about music. "Music isn't just about the notes on the page, sweetheart," Nana Rose used to say. "It's about the feelings in your heart that come out through your fingers." Maya had been good, really good. By the time she was 16, she was playing pieces that made grown-ups stop and listen. Her high school music teacher, Mrs. Chen, had even talked to her parents about applying to music schools. But life had other plans. When Maya was 17, her father lost his job at the factory. Money became tight, really tight. College seemed impossible, especially an expensive music program. So Maya got a job at a local diner to help her family pay the bills. She told herself it was just temporary, just until things got better. But things didn't get better. Her father got sick, and the medical bills piled up. Maya's dreams of music, school faded away like morning mist. She kept playing at home, though. Every chance she got, she would sit at that piano and play the pieces she had learned, and sometimes she would even try to write her own songs. Now, 3 years later, she was still waiting tables, still struggling to make ends meet, and still playing piano in her tiny apartment where no one could hear her except the neighbors upstairs, who sometimes banged on the floor when she played too late at night. Romano's Italian restaurant was the kind of place where the carpet was always a little sticky and the smell of garlic and oregano hung in the air like a thick cloud. Maya had been working there since she moved to the city. It wasn't her dream job, but Mr. Romano was kind enough, and the tips were decent on good nights. The restaurant had this beautiful black grand piano sitting in the corner of the main dining room. Maya had asked about it once, and Mr. Romano told her it had belonged to his father, who used to play for the guests back in the old days. "Papa used to make that piano sing," he said with a sad smile. "These days it just sits there looking pretty." Maya found herself looking at that piano during her shifts. Sometimes when she was wiping down tables nearby, she would run her fingers along its polished surface. It was a Steinway, she could tell from the logo. The kind of piano she had only dreamed of playing. Her co-workers at Romano's were nice enough, but they didn't know much about her life outside of work. There was Janet, the head waitress who had been there for 10 years and knew every regular customer by name. There was Tommy, the young busboy who was saving money for college. And there was Lisa, another waitress who was always talking about her boyfriend and their weekend plans. They saw Maya as the quiet one, the one who kept to herself and never complained about getting the worst sections or working the closing shifts. She never went out with them after work for drinks, never joined in their gossip about difficult customers, not because she didn't like them, but because she was always tired, always trying to save money and always rushing home to practice piano before her neighbors got angry. Maya's typical day started at 6 a.m. She would get dressed in her black pants and white button-down shirt, pin her hair back, and put on the comfortable shoes that had seen better days. The walk to Romano's took 20 minutes, and she used that time to listen to music on her old phone, usually classical pieces or jazz standards that reminded her of the songs Nana Rose used to play. The lunch shift was usually busy. Maya would take orders, serve food, clean tables, and smile at customers even when they were rude or left tiny tips. She had gotten good at remembering what people wanted without writing it down, and she never mixed up orders, even when the restaurant was packed. But it was during the slow afternoon hours that Maya's mind would wander. She would look at that piano and imagine what it would be like to sit down and play it. She wondered if the keys felt different from her grandmother's old upright. She wondered what it would sound like in the big dining room with all those high ceilings. Sometimes, when no one was looking, Maya would find herself humming while she worked. Little melodies would pop into her head, and she would hum them quietly as she folded napkins or filled salt shakers. Once, Mrs. Patterson, a regular customer who came in every Tuesday for lunch, heard her humming and said, "My dear, you have such a lovely voice. Do you sing?" Maya had blushed and shaken her head. "Oh no, ma'am. I just hum sometimes without thinking about it." "Well, you should think about it," Mrs. Patterson had said. "You have a gift." But Maya didn't think of herself as having any gifts. She thought of herself as someone who used to play piano, not someone who could still be a musician. That dream felt like it belonged to a different person, someone younger and more hopeful. The evening shifts were harder. By 6 p.m. Maya's feet would be aching, and she would still have 4 hours left to work. The dinner crowd was different from the lunch people. They stayed longer, ordered more drinks, and were sometimes less patient. But they also tipped better, which meant Maya could sometimes afford to buy groceries that weren't on sale. After closing time, Maya would help clean up the restaurant. She would stack chairs on tables, sweep floors, and count her tips for the day. On good days, she made enough to cover her rent and utilities. On bad days, she would have to choose between buying groceries or putting gas in her old car. The drive home was always quiet. Maya would listen to the radio and think about her day. She would think about the piano sitting in the corner of Romano's, silent and beautiful. She would think about Nana Rose and the lessons they used to have together. And she would think about the music inside her head, the melodies that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Back in her apartment, Maya would heat up whatever leftovers she had brought home from the restaurant. Mr. Romano was good about letting his employees take home food that would otherwise be thrown away. Then, if it wasn't too late, she would sit at her grandmother's piano and play. Her fingers knew these keys like they knew her own heartbeat. She would start with scales to warm up, then move on to the pieces she had learned years ago. Chopin's nocturnes, Bach's inventions, some jazz standards that Nana Rose had taught her. Sometimes she would try to play the melodies that had been stuck in her head all day, working out the harmonies by ear. The piano wasn't in perfect tune. Maya couldn't afford to have it professionally tuned, but it didn't matter. When she played, the small apartment filled with music, and for a little while all her worries disappeared. She wasn't thinking about rent money or difficult customers or her sore feet. She was just Maya and the music, the way it used to be, when she was young and believed anything was possible. But reality always came back. The neighbors would bang on the ceiling if she played too late. The alarm would go off too early the next morning. The bills would still be waiting on her kitchen table. Maya had gotten used to this life, this routine of work and worry and stolen moments of music. She told herself that having a job was enough, that being able to play piano at home was enough, that dreams were for people who could afford them. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that in just a few days, her quiet life would be turned upside down by a single moment of courage. She didn't know that the piano at Romano's was waiting for her, that all those customers eating their pasta and pizza were about to witness something extraordinary. All she knew was that tomorrow would be another day just like today. Tables to serve, orders to take, and music to keep locked away in her heart, where no one else could hear it. Little did she know that sometimes the biggest moments in our lives come when we least expect them, and sometimes the stages we never imagined become the places where our dreams finally come true. Friday nights at Romano's were always crazy, but this particular Friday felt different from the moment Maya walked through the employee entrance. There was an electric buzz in the air, and she could hear Mr. Romano on the phone in his office, his voice more excited than usual. "What's going on?" Maya asked Tommy as she tied her apron around her waist. It's open mic night, Tommy said, grinning. Mr. Romano decided to try it again. Remember last time? That guy who sang opera so loud that Mrs. Henderson complained her hearing aid was squeaking? Maya remembered. Open mic night at Romano's happened once a month, and it was always a mixed bag. Sometimes they got really talented people who made the evening special. Other times they got people who thought they were talented but really weren't. The idea was simple. Anyone could sign up to perform while people ate dinner. Singers, musicians, poets, even comedians sometimes. Mr. Romano had started it because he thought it would bring in more customers and make the restaurant feel more lively. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. As Maya started setting up her section, she noticed they had moved some tables around to create a small performance area near the piano. Someone had set up a microphone and a small spotlight. The piano's lid was open, and Maya could see the keys gleaming under the restaurant's warm lights. "Who's performing tonight?" she asked Janet, who was already busy taking drink orders from early customers. "Oh, the usual suspects," Janet replied, balancing 3 glasses of wine on her tray. "Mrs. Rodriguez is going to sing something in Spanish. She's got a beautiful voice. And that college kid, what's his name, David, he's bringing his guitar. Again. Should be a good night." The dinner crowd started arriving around 6 p.m., and by 7 o'clock the restaurant was packed. Maya was running between her tables, taking orders and serving food, but she kept glancing over at the performance area. The first performer, Mrs. Rodriguez, had just finished a lovely Spanish ballad that had the whole restaurant clapping along. Next up was David, the college student with his guitar. He was nervous. Maya could tell by the way he kept adjusting his guitar strap and clearing his throat. But once he started playing, he relaxed. His voice was young but strong, and he played a folk song that reminded Maya of the coffee shops she used to visit when she was in high school. The audience was enjoying themselves. People were clapping, some were even singing along when they knew the words. Maya found herself humming as she worked, caught up in the musical atmosphere of the evening. But then things started to go wrong. The third performer was a woman in her 50s who had signed up to sing jazz standards. She seemed confident enough when she took the microphone, but as soon as she started singing, it became clear that confidence and ability were 2 very different things. Her voice was shaky and off-key, and she forgot the words halfway through. "Fly me to the moon." The audience was polite, they clapped anyway, but Maya could see people starting to check their phones and have side conversations. The magical atmosphere from earlier was beginning to fade. The fourth performer was even worse. A man in his 20s who thought he was a comedian but whose jokes fell flat. He made inappropriate comments that made some customers uncomfortable, and Maya watched as 2 families with young children decided to leave early. Mr. Romano was starting to look worried. Maya could see him pacing behind the bar, running his hands through his gray hair the way he always did when he was stressed. Then came the announcement that changed everything. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Romano said, taking the microphone himself, "I'm sorry to say that our piano player for tonight has called in sick. We were supposed to have some beautiful piano music to close out our show, but—" He spread his hands, helplessly. Maya felt her heart skip a beat. They were supposed to have a piano player? She watched as disappointed murmurs rippled through the crowd. "If anyone here can play piano," Mr. Romano continued, his voice a bit desperate now, "we'd be very grateful. Free meal and you can keep any tips from the jar." Maya looked around the restaurant. People were shaking their heads, shrugging, going back to their conversations. The energy in the room was definitely dying down. Some customers were asking for their checks. "Looks like another open mic night disaster," Janet whispered to Maya as they passed each other near the kitchen. "Remember 3 months ago when nobody showed up except that weird guy who recited poetry about his cat for 20 minutes? Maya remembered. That had been painful to watch. But as she stood there holding a tray of dirty dishes, looking at that beautiful piano with nobody to play it, something stirred inside her. It was a feeling she hadn't had in years, a mix of longing and possibility that made her hands tingle. She tried to push the feeling down. She was a waitress, not a performer. She hadn't played for an audience since her high school recital 7. Years ago. What if she made a fool of herself? What if she froze up? What if her fingers wouldn't work the way they used to? But the piano was just sitting there, waiting, and Mr. Romano looked so disappointed, and the customers who had come expecting a nice evening of music were starting to leave. "Earth to Maya," Lisa said, bumping into her with a tray full of plates. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Maya said quickly, but her voice came out squeaky. "Good, because table 12 is asking for extra Parmesan, and table 6 wants to know if we have any more of those breadsticks." Maya nodded and went back to work, but her mind was racing. Every time she passed the piano, she felt that stirring. Again. She found herself remembering the feeling of keys under her fingers, the way music could fill a room and make people stop talking and just listen. By 8:30, the situation had gotten worse. 2 more performers had tried their luck, but one was a tone-deaf singer who cleared out half the dining room, and the other was a spoken-word artist whose poems were so depressing that people started looking at their phones and asking for their checks. Mr. Romano was behind the bar now, polishing glasses with more force than necessary, his go-to stress activity. Maya had worked there long enough to know that when Mr. Romano started aggressively cleaning glassware, he was either very worried or very frustrated. Tonight, he was probably both. "This is a disaster," she heard him mutter to Marco, the bartender. "People are leaving. The Hendersons just canceled their anniversary dinner reservation for next week. They said they don't want to risk another night like this." Maya's heart went out to him. Mr. Romano was a good boss, even if he could be gruff sometimes. He had hired her when she desperately needed a job, and he had never made her feel bad about being inexperienced. He deserved better than this. She was carrying a tray of empty glasses back to the kitchen when it happened. As she passed table 7, she heard one of the customers, a man in an expensive suit, talking loudly on his phone. "Yeah, we're at this Italian place," he was saying. "They're having some kind of amateur hour thing. It's pretty painful to watch, actually. These people think they have talent, but..." He laughed in a way that made Maya's stomach turn. "It's like watching a car crash. You can't look away." His dinner companion, a woman in pearls, giggled. "That poor woman who sang earlier," she said. "Someone should have told her to stick to karaoke night at the local bar." Maya felt her cheeks burn. These people were treating the performers like they were there for their entertainment in the worst way. Not to enjoy the music, but to laugh at people who were brave enough to try. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been so nervous before. She sang but had poured her heart into that Spanish song. She thought about David, the college student who was probably proud of himself for getting up there with his guitar. They were trying. They were putting themselves out there, which was more than most people ever did. As Maya reached the kitchen, she could hear Janet talking to the other servers. "At least it's almost over," Janet was saying. "One more terrible performance and we can call it a night. Maybe Mr. Romano will give up on this open mic night idea once and for all." "I don't know," Tommy said. "He really wants it to work. He keeps talking about how his father used to have musicians here all the time, how the place used to be known for its music." Maya stopped walking. She had heard Mr. Romano talk about his father before, about how the restaurant used to be different, more special somehow. That's why the piano was there. It had been his father's dream to have Romano's be a place where people came not just for the food, but for the music. She looked through the kitchen doorway at the dining room. The piano was still sitting there, beautiful and silent. Most of the audience was finishing their meals and getting ready to leave. In a few minutes, Mr. Romano would probably have to get on the microphone and apologize for the disappointing evening. That's when Maya made a decision that would change her life forever. She set down her tray of glasses, untied her apron, and took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking and her heart was beating so fast she thought it might jump out of her chest. But for the first time in 3 years, she felt truly alive. She was going to play that piano. She had no idea what would happen next. She had no idea if she would remember how to play in front of people, or if her fingers would cooperate, or if the audience would listen or laugh or simply ignore her. But she couldn't watch Mr. Romano's dream die without at least trying to help. As she walked toward the performance area, she heard Jan Maya's legs felt like jelly as she walked across the restaurant floor. Every step toward the piano seemed to take forever, and yet she felt like she was moving too fast, like she might trip over her own feet at any moment. Her heart was pounding so loud she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. The dining room had gotten quieter as the evening went on. Many customers had already left, disappointed by the performances they had witnessed. The ones who remained were mostly finishing their desserts or having after-dinner coffee, their conversations low and polite. The energy that had filled the room earlier was almost completely gone. As Maya approached the piano bench, she heard Janet's voice behind her, sharper now with confusion and a hint of annoyance. "Maya, seriously, where are you going? You can't. Just walk away from your tables." Maya paused for a moment, her hand resting on the back of the piano bench. She could turn around right now. She could go back to serving coffee and clearing tables and pretending that the music inside her didn't exist. It would be safe, it would be normal. It would be exactly what everyone expected from the quiet waitress who never caused any trouble. But then she looked at Mr. Romano, who was still behind the bar, still polishing those glasses with the look of a man whose dreams were slipping away. She looked at the beautiful piano that had been silent for too long, and she looked at the few remaining customers who deserved better than a disappointing end to their evening. Maya sat down on the piano bench. The moment her body made contact with the leather seat, she felt something electric run through her. It had been years since she had sat at a piano in front of other people, but her body remembered. Her feet found the pedals automatically, and her hands hovered over the keys like they were greeting old friends. The restaurant wasn't completely quiet. There were still the sounds of clinking silverware, quiet conversations, and the hum of the air conditioning. But Maya became aware that some people had noticed her sitting at the piano. She could feel eyes on her, curious and perhaps a bit skeptical. She heard Janet's voice again, closer now, and filled with disbelief. "Maya, what are you doing? You can't just sit down at the piano. That's for the performers." Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she didn't move. I can play," she said softly without turning around. "What?" Janet laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "Maya, this isn't the time for jokes. Get back to work." Other servers had noticed the commotion now. Tommy had stopped buzzing tables and was staring. Lisa had emerged from the kitchen with a confused expression. Even some of the customers had turned to see what was happening. "She thinks she can play piano," Janet said to the other servers, her voice carrying across the dining room in that particular way that voices carry when someone is trying to be quiet but failing. Our Maya, who's never said 2 words about music in 3 years. Maya felt her face getting hotter. She could hear the judgment in Janet's voice, the assumption that someone like Maya, someone who served tables and wore old shoes and lived in a tiny apartment, couldn't possibly have any hidden talents, but it was Tommy who made everything worse by trying to be helpful. "Maybe she can play chopsticks or something," he said with a good-natured grin. "You know, like in the movies where someone sits down at a piano and plays one song badly while everyone laughs?" The remaining customers were definitely paying attention now. Maya could feel their eyes on her back, could hear the whispers starting. She caught a fragment of conversation from the table behind her. "Is that one of the waitresses? I think she's having some kind of breakdown. Should someone stop her?" Maya's hands were shaking now, hovering over the keys but not touching them. Every instinct in her body was screaming at her to get up, apologize, and go back to work. What had she been thinking? These people didn't want to hear her play. They wanted their checks and to go home to forget about this disappointing evening. Mr. Romano had noticed the disturbance and was walking over from behind the bar. Maya could see him approaching in her peripheral vision, and she knew he was probably coming to gently ask her to return to her duties. "Maya," Mr. Romano said softly when he reached her. "What's going on here?" Before Maya could answer, Janet jumped in. "She thinks she can play piano, Mr. Romano. I tried to tell her to get back to work, but she's just sitting there." Mr. Romano looked at Maya with kind but puzzled eyes. "Maya, do you play piano?" Maya's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, sir, I do." The admission hung in the air like a soap bubble, fragile and shimmering and ready to pop at any moment. Janet snorted. "Right, and I'm a professional dancer. Maya, this is embarrassing, for all of us." Maya felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She started to stand up, ready to apologize and slink back to the kitchen where she could hide her burning cheeks and pretend this had never happened. But then she heard another voice from across the restaurant. It was Mrs. Patterson, the regular customer who came in every Tuesday for lunch, the one who had complimented Maya's humming weeks ago. "Let her play," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "What harm could it do?" Janet rolled her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson, with all due respect, you don't understand. Maya's never mentioned playing piano before. She's just what?" Mrs. Patterson's voice was sharp now, cutting through Janet's protests. "Just a waitress? Just not good? Enough to try?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Maya looked around the restaurant and saw something she hadn't expected to see. Some of the customers were nodding in agreement with Mrs. Patterson. Others were looking at Janet with expressions that suggested they didn't like what they were hearing. "I think she should play too," said David, the college student who had performed earlier with his guitar. "I mean, this is open mic night, right? It's supposed to be for everyone." Maya felt a tiny spark of courage flicker to life in her chest. These people didn't know her, but they were willing to give her a chance. They were willing to listen. But Janet wasn't finished. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice getting louder and more frustrated. "Maya, you're making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself and the rest of us. Just get up and go back to work before you make this worse." That's when Maya felt something snap inside her. It was like a rubber band that had been stretched too tight for too long. All the years of keeping quiet, of hiding her dreams, of letting people assume she was nothing more than a waitress who couldn't aspire to anything better, it all came rushing to the surface. She turned around on the piano bench and looked directly at Janet. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. "I've been playing piano since I was 5 years old," she said. "My grandmother taught me. I played in recitals and competitions. I was good, Janet. Really good." Janet's mouth fell open slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Then why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because," Maya said, her voice getting stronger, "I learned that sometimes people don't want to know that you have dreams. They want to keep you in the box they've put you in." The restaurant had gone almost completely quiet now. Even the kitchen staff had gathered in the doorway to see what was happening. Maya could feel everyone looking at her, some with curiosity, some with skepticism, some with something that might have been hope. Mr. Romano cleared his throat. "Maya," he said gently, "if you can play, I would be honored to have you perform in my restaurant. That piano belonged to my father. He always said it was waiting for the right person to bring it back to life." Maya felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of embarrassment. They were tears of gratitude for a boss who was willing to give her a chance and for the few customers who had stood up for her when she couldn't stand up for herself. She turned back to the piano and placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under her fingers, familiar and foreign at the same time. She had played her grandmother's piano thousands of times, but this was different. This was a concert grand, perfectly tuned with keys that responded to the slightest touch. Behind her, she could hear Janet muttering something under her breath, probably about how this was all going to end badly and reflect poorly on the restaurant. She could hear the skeptical whispers from some of the customers who were still convinced this was going to be a disaster. But she could also hear Mrs. Patterson's encouraging voice saying, "Go on, dear. Show them what you can do." Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she could hear Nana Rose's voice from all those years ago. "Music isn't just about the notes on the page, sweetheart. It's about the feelings in your heart that come out through your fingers." Maya had a lot of feelings in her heart, years of them, dreams deferred, hopes hidden, talents buried under the weight of practical concerns and other people's expectations. But now, for the first time in years, she had a chance to let those feelings out. She opened her eyes, looked down at the keys, and began to play. The first note rang out clear and pure, silencing the whispers and the skepticism. Maya's fingers found their way to the familiar opening of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece her grandmother had taught her when she was 12 years old. The sound that came from the piano was nothing like the tinny, slightly out of tune sound from her grandmother's old upright. This piano sang. Every note was crystal clear, every phrase shaped and molded by. The first few measures of Chopin's Nocturne floated through Romano's like morning mist, soft and delicate and absolutely perfect. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had been carrying heavy trays and wiping down tables just moments before. The transformation was instant and magical. Every conversation in the restaurant stopped mid-sentence. Every fork paused halfway to every mouth. Even the sounds from the kitchen faded away as the cooks and dishwashers crept closer to listen. Maya herself was transformed. The nervous, apologetic waitress who had been shaking just minutes before had disappeared, replaced by someone who belonged at that piano bench. Her posture was perfect, her movements fluid and confident. It was as if the music was pulling the real Maya out from wherever she had been hiding for the past 3 years. The Nocturne was a piece that demanded subtlety and emotion, and Maya played it like she had lived inside every note. Her left hand created a gentle, rocking accompaniment, while her right hand sang the melody with a sweetness that made people close their eyes and remember things they had forgotten. First loves, childhood summers, moments of perfect happiness, that seemed to exist outside of time. Janet stood frozen behind Maya, her mouth slightly open, all her earlier skepticism replaced by shock. She had worked alongside Maya for 3 years, had shared coffee breaks and complained about difficult customers together, and yet she had never suspected that this quiet, unassuming woman could create something so beautiful. Mr. Romano had tears in his eyes. He was thinking about his father who had played the same piano 50 years ago, filling the restaurant with music and laughter. The old man would have loved Maya's playing, would have recognized in her the same passion for music that had driven him to make Romano's more than just a place to eat. But it was the customers who provided the most dramatic response. The well-dressed man who had been making cruel comments on his phone just 20 minutes earlier had forgotten all about his call. He was leaning forward in his seat, completely captivated by the music. His companion had set down her wineglass and was listening with the kind of attention usually reserved for concert halls. Mrs. Patterson was smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had known all along that Maya was special. She had heard that humming, had recognized the musical intelligence behind it, and now she was watching a young woman's hidden talent bloom before everyone's eyes. David, the college student, was sitting at the edge of his seat, his own guitar, forgotten. As someone who performed music himself, he could recognize the difference between someone who could play notes and someone who could make music. Maya wasn't just playing the piano, she was speaking through it, telling a story that everyone in the room could understand even without words. As the Nocturne drew to its gentle close, Maya held the final chord just long enough for it to resonate through the restaurant before lifting her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was profound. Not the uncomfortable silence of people who didn't know what to say, but the breathless silence of people who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Then the applause began. It started with Mrs. Patterson, clapping enthusiastically, then David joining in, then the well-dressed couple, then everyone else in the restaurant. But Maya wasn't finished. She had years of music bottled up inside her, and now that the cork had been pulled, it all wanted to come pouring out. Without pausing, she transitioned into Debussy's Clair de Lune, another piece from her repertoire with Nana Rose. Where the Chopin had been gentle and introspective, the Debussy was mysterious and dreamy, like moonlight dancing on water. Maya's touch was even more delicate now, drawing sounds from the piano that seemed to shimmer and glow. The customers who had been getting ready to leave were settling back into their seats. Some were even calling their servers over to order more, coffee or dessert, wanting to stay longer to listen. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. What had been a disappointing evening was transforming into something magical. Maya could feel the audience's attention like warmth from a fire. It had been so long since she had played for people, so long since she had felt that electric connection between performer and listener. Every note she played seemed to come back to her multiplied, reflected in the faces of people who were truly hearing her. As Clair de Lune faded away, Maya made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of stopping, she shifted into jazz, Territory with a sultry, sophisticated arrangement of summertime. This was dangerous territory. Jazz required not just technical skill, but improvisation, the ability to take a familiar melody and make it completely your own. But Maya's grandmother hadn't just taught her classical music. Nana Rose had been young during the jazz age, and she had passed on her love of Gershwin and Porter and Ellington to her granddaughter. Maya's fingers found their way into the bluesy harmonies and syncopated rhythms as naturally as if she had been playing jazz in smoky nightclubs for years. The restaurant staff was completely mesmerized. Tommy had given up all pretense of working and was standing against the wall, his bus tub forgotten. Lisa had tears streaming down her face. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her life. Even the tough line cooks had emerged from the kitchen, their aprons stained and their faces full of wonder. But it was Janet who underwent the most dramatic transformation. The woman who had been so quick to dismiss Maya's abilities, so certain that the quiet waitress couldn't possibly have any hidden talents, was now watching with a mixture of awe and something that might have been shame. She was realizing how wrong she had been, not just about Maya's musical abilities, but about who Maya was as a person. Maya's arrangement of Summertime was both faithful to Gershwin's original and completely her own. She took liberties with the melody, adding embellishments and variations that showed off not just her technical skill, but her deep understanding of the music. When she reached the instrumental section, her improvisation was so natural and flowing that it sounded like she was having a conversation with the piano itself. The well-dressed customers were leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed. The man who had been making cruel comments earlier was shaking his head in amazement, probably wondering how he could have been so wrong about this place and these people. New customers were actually arriving, drawn by the music they could hear from the street. Word was spreading somehow, maybe through text messages or social media posts, because the restaurant was filling up again with people who had come specifically to listen. Mr. Romano was behind the bar, but he wasn't polishing glasses anymore. He was just watching Maya play his father's piano, watching her bring it back to life in a way he had only dreamed about. The old restaurant was remembering what it used to be, when music was as important as food and people came not just to eat, but to experience something beautiful. As Maya brought Summertime to its languorous close, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like herself. Not the version of herself that paid bills and served tables and worried about money, but the version that Nana Rose had seen and nurtured all those years ago. The version that was meant to make music. The applause this time was thunderous. People weren't just clapping, they were shouting bravo and whistling and stamping their feet. Someone called out, "More," and soon the whole restaurant was chanting it. More, more, more. Maya turned around on the piano bench for the first time since she had started playing. What she saw took her breath away. The restaurant was packed now, not just with the customers, who had been there for dinner, but with new people who had been drawn in by the music. There were people standing in the doorway, people who had been walking by on the street and had stopped to listen, and every single one of them was looking at her with expressions of pure joy and appreciation. These weren't just polite audience, members being kind to an amateur performer. These were people who recognized that they were witnessing something special, something that would stay with them long after they went home. Janet was crying now, not from sadness but from the overwhelming beauty of what she had just heard. She pushed her way through the crowd and approached the piano. "Maya," she said, her voice shaky with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I was wrong about everything." Maya looked at her coworker, this woman who had dismissed her so quickly, who had been so certain that a waitress couldn't possibly have any hidden depths, and felt not anger, but compassion. How many people went through life never knowing what talents the people around them possessed? How many hidden gifts were there in the world, waiting for the right moment to be revealed? "It's okay," Maya said softly. "I never told anyone. How could you have known?" But the crowd wasn't interested in apologies. They wanted more music. And Maya, for the first time in years, felt ready to give it to them. She turned back to the piano, her heart full of joy and possibility, and began to play again. Maya's fingers found the opening chords of Rhapsody in Blue, and the restaurant erupted in excited whispers. This was Gershwin's masterpiece, a piece that demanded not just technical skill, but the kind of musical understanding that took years to develop. It was ambitious, perhaps even risky, but Maya felt fearless now. The piece began with that famous clarinet glissando, which Maya translated to the piano with a sweeping run that seemed to gather all the energy in the room and focus it into pure music. As she launched into the main theme, her playing became more bold, more confident, more absolutely captivating than anything she had played before. This wasn't the gentle Maya who served coffee and apologized when customers were rude to her. This was Maya the musician, Maya the artist, Maya the woman who had been hiding inside a waitress uniform for 3 years, but had never really gone away. The crowd pressed closer to the piano, drawn by music that seemed to tell the story of America itself. The jazz age, the big city dreams, the hope and heartbreak and ultimate triumph of people who dared to reach for something beyond their circumstances. Maya's arrangement wove together the classical training her grandmother had given her, with the jazz sensibilities she had absorbed through years of listening and loving music. Mr. Romano was on his phone now, not to complain or ask for help, but to call his wife. "Maria," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have to get down here. You have to hear this. It's like Papa's ghost is in the building, like the old days are back." People were pulling out their phones too, but not to check messages or scroll through social media. They were recording Maya's performance, capturing this magical moment to share with friends and family who weren't lucky enough to be there in person. The well-dressed man who had been so dismissive earlier was now completely transfixed. His expensive suit and superior attitude seemed ridiculous now, faced with the raw talent and genuine emotion of a woman he had written off as unimportant. He found himself thinking about his own dreams, the ones he had abandoned in favor of practical concerns and financial success. When had he last felt the kind of passion that was radiating from this young woman at the piano? David, the college student, was frantically texting his friends. "You guys have to get down to Romano's right now," he typed with shaking fingers. "There's this waitress here who's basically the next Alicia Keys. I'm not even joking. This is incredible." Tommy had completely abandoned his duties as a busboy and was standing against the wall with tears streaming down his face. He had grown up in a house where music was always playing, where his grandmother sang lullabies in Italian and his father played guitar on the front porch. But he had never heard anything like this. Music that seemed to reach inside your chest and rearrange everything you thought you knew about beauty and possibility. Lisa was recording on her phone too, but she kept having to wipe her eyes because tears were blurring her vision. She was thinking about her own abandoned dreams. She had wanted to be a dancer once, before practical concerns and family obligations took over. Watching Maya transformed at the piano was making her remember what it felt like to have dreams that seemed bigger than your current circumstances. As Maya reached the most technically demanding section of the Rhapsody, her fingers flew across the keys with precision and passion that would have impressed professional concert pianists. She was completely lost in the music now, channeling years of suppressed creativity into every note, every phrase, every dynamic change. The restaurant had become something like a concert hall. Conversations had stopped entirely. Even the kitchen staff had turned off the equipment they could spare and gathered to listen. The only sounds were Maya's playing and the occasional gasp of amazement from someone in the audience. But it wasn't just the technical perfection that was captivating everyone. It was the story Maya was telling through the music, the story of a dream deferred but not destroyed, of talent that had been hidden but never lost, of a young woman finding her voice after years of silence. As the Rhapsody built to its triumphant conclusion, Maya played with a power and confidence that seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant. The final chords rang out like a declaration. "I am here. I am talented. I matter." The silence that followed lasted for several heartbeats. Then the applause began, and it was unlike anything Romano's had ever heard. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering, whistling, shouting bravo, and incredible, and amazing. Some people had tears streaming down their faces. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. Maya stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the audience. What she saw was overwhelming, a room full of people on their feet, applauding not just her performance but the courage it had taken to share her gift with the world. The transformation was complete. She was no longer the invisible waitress. She was Maya the musician, and everyone in that room knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Mrs. Patterson pushed her way through the crowd to reach Maya first. "My dear," she said, grasping Maya's hands in both of hers, "that was absolutely magnificent. You have a gift that must not be wasted." Mr. Romano was right behind her, his eyes bright with excitement and possibility. "Maya," he said, "I don't know what to say. You've brought my father's piano back to life. You've brought the whole restaurant back to life." People were pressing closer now, wanting to congratulate Maya, to shake her hand, to be close to someone who had just given them such a powerful experience. The well-dressed man who had been so cruel earlier waited his turn, then approached with humility written all over his face. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I said some terrible things earlier about the performers tonight. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. What you just did it was magical." David bounced up to Maya with excitement. "That was insane," he said, grinning from ear to ear. "I've been playing guitar for years and I thought I was pretty good, but what you just did, that's what real musicianship looks like." Janet approached more hesitantly, still emotional from what she had witnessed. "Maya, I don't know how to apologize enough. I was so wrong about you, about everything. Can you ever forgive me?" Maya looked at her coworker with compassion. "There's nothing to forgive," she said. "We all have parts of ourselves that we keep hidden. How could you have known?" But Mr. Romano had something more important than apologies on his mind. "Maya," he said, pulling her aside as the crowd continued to buzz with excitement, "I have a proposition for you. What would you say to playing here regularly? Friday and Saturday nights, maybe Thursday too if you're interested. We could set up a proper performance schedule, advertise it, make Romano's the place people come to hear great music." Maya's heart leaped. "Mr. Romano, that sounds wonderful, but I don't know if I could afford to give up my waitressing shifts. I need the steady income." Mr. Romano smiled. "Who said anything about giving up anything? We'll pay you to perform. Good money, more than you make serving tables. And look at this crowd. Do you see how many people came in just to listen to your music? Think about what this could do for business." As if to prove his point, customers were lining up at the bar to buy drinks, ordering desserts they hadn't planned, to eat, asking about making reservations for next weekend. Maya's performance hadn't just been artistically successful, it was already proving to be good for business too. Tommy appeared at Maya's elbow with the tip jar from the performance area. "You should see this," he said with wonder. The jar was overflowing with bills, not just ones and fives, but 20s and even some 50s. People had been so moved by Maya's performance that they had emptied their wallets. But the most amazing part was still to come. As Maya stood there surrounded by admirers and well-wishers, she noticed someone recording her with a professional-looking camera. A woman in her 30s approached with a business card. "Hi, Maya. I'm Jennifer Chen from Channel 7 News. I was having dinner here tonight and caught your performance. Would you be interested in doing an interview? I think our viewers would love to hear your story." Before Maya could answer, another person stepped forward. "I'm Robert Williams from the Tribune," he said. "I'd love to write a feature about you. Local woman discovers hidden talent, that kind of thing. But honestly, after hearing you play, I think this story is much bigger than that." Maya looked around at the crowd, at the reporters, at Mr. Romano's excited face, at the piano that had become her gateway to a new life. Just 2 hours ago, she had been a struggling waitress worried about paying rent. Now she was being offered a performing contract, interviewed by reporters and celebrated by a room full of people who had been moved by her music. As the evening wound down and the last customers finally left, Maya sat back down at the piano bench. The restaurant was quiet now except for the staff cleaning up, but the magic of the evening still hung in the air. She played one final song, softly and just for herself, a lullaby that Nana Rose used to sing to her when she was little. It was a simple melody, but it contained all the gratitude Maya felt for her grandmother, who had given her this gift. for Mr. Romano who had given her this chance, and for the courage she had finally found to share her music with the world. Tomorrow, Maya's life would be different. Tomorrow she would wake up,